name's Ted Isbell. I'm a forensic architect for the Vertex companies. I travel around and try to help people solve problems with buildings. So if you know anybody, well, if you have a building, you either have a problem or will likely have a problem. We'll talk. Excited to be here today. Just before this lunch session, we had our Construction 201, Construction and Development 201, second in a series on building and development, kind of keys to success for that. We had some people from planning and zoning. We had the director, Tim Keene, and Crystal Rain. And that's a good kind of segue or dovetail into today's topic, which is all about the zoning code rewrite. You've probably heard a lot about that. There's been some publicity and some perception and maybe misperception about that. So today we're going to try to give you the facts and the straight story and give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have about that. To do this, we have Deanna Dupuy. She is the City Planning and Design Manager for the City of Boise, shaping plans at all scales to guide the physical and economic development of this rapidly growing city over there. Deanna has led key projects including the modern zoning code, which you'll hear about, Boise Pathways Master Plan, and the North End Neighborhood Plan. Previously, she was a regional planner focusing on active transportation for Southern California Association of Governments, which sounds really complicated and bureaucratic, so good job surviving that. Prior to her career in urban planning, Deanna was also an elementary school teacher, which maybe those two work together. Southern California Association of Governments and elementary school. She holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan, the Wolverines, and a bachelor's degree from Occidental College. Along with Deanna, we have Jessica Zelag, and Jessica is the Deputy Director for City of Boise's Planning and Development Services, so maybe Tim gets all the credit and you do all the work. Maybe. She oversees the city's zoning and entitlement process, which we talked about this morning, long-range planning, and mobility and public space planning. Jessica holds a master's in public administration from the University of Washington's Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Philosophy from Villanova University. So, welcome these ladies here to the table and give them a warm Oma Aino welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a few words and then Deanna's going to kick off the slides, but I just wanted to thank all of you for having us here today and the earlier event too, where Tim and Crystal were speaking about the modern zoning code. I also just wanted to say how much I appreciate all the work that you all do. When I was in Seattle for 13 years and I managed a nonprofit that worked really closely with BOMA and BOMA members, property owners, managers, those who make buildings great, engaging people in their transportation management plans. So how all of those tenants got to work every day, either biking, or busing, or carpooling, or whatever it is. So spent a few of my luncheons at BOMA, and so it's nice to be here. And I also can't imagine what you all are up against post-COVID and the way the work environment is changing and how I'm sure tenant improvements and just trying to get people back into the office is a big part of what you all do, and thinking about like what makes a great place for people to spend really the majority of their time in their working years. So appreciate that. We're going to talk about the modern zoning code, which I represent the planning division. Deanna and I are in 1/3 of what is the entire planning department. We're the group that when someone wants to build something in the city, they have to come to our shop first, and we say whether it can happen or where it should happen and how it should look. Then you move on to our building and permits group, where that's where the civil engineers and structural engineers and fire inspectors and electricians are, so that that building's sound and built in the correct way. And then we also have another division, which is our housing and community development group, which Boise is really unique in the country in that not only does our housing group help people through transitional housing, but we also manage some affordable housing units. So we have that lower rate that people can pay to live in those units. And then we also build housing through a land trust and working with private developers and other nonprofits. So the city is doing a lot to just make sure that we house our citizens, and that's the group that we're in. On the planning side, so the code that currently exists today in Boise, and for, I don't know the day, I think it's 44 more days, we've had since 1966. And it's served us well, but in the 60s, that was a really different way of thinking about like what cities should be, how cities should grow, where people should live, how they should go back and forth from where they lived to where they were. And so over time, we've kind of seen that code not really work well for us, or that we were getting a lot of projects coming through that were asking to do something different because people wanted a more pedestrian-friendly environment, or they wanted to go a little higher. And so over time, we've just seen so many exceptions come through that we really needed to overhaul what the whole code does. So the code is 611 pages. We're not going to go through it today, y'all. And it's zoning, it's land use and planning. It can get a little wonky. We'll kind of cover what the main goals were with the code, and then social maps about where that is that we're thinking we want to see different kind of development happen. And then Dan will go over that, and then I'll talk a little bit about what it means for us to quote unquote go into effect. That's December 1st. And so you'll hear about it in the news, or you'll just start to see projects over time change as far as like, oh, that's interesting that that's going in there, and you can tie it all back to this luncheon where you learned about zoning and land use and planning. So here's Deanna.
I can stand, just to know that I can see the screen too. Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me, and as Jessica said, I'm going to go over a bit of the overall framework for the code, and then kind of show some of the different areas of the city that we've allocated or put into new zones. So, as Jessica said, when we were trying to create a modern zoning code, we looked at what our community really wants and how that has changed from 1966. Not only what we want, but the needs of our community members. So looking at creating goals that really focused on a variety of housing options, we provided some edits and changes for our residential zones to enable more variety within our neighborhoods. Looking at creating a predictable and sustainable development pattern, as Jessica also said, since 1966 to now, if you've ever worked through the entitlement process with the city of Boise, there's a lot of exceptions or variances or different ways to get around things, which is challenging not only if you are a developer trying to move something through the process, but also if you're a resident trying to expect what's going to be built within your city. So can we create a code that focuses on a predictable development pattern? And then also thinking about how it can be a sustainable one, knowing that we have a limited footprint within the city of Boise, we have limited resources, natural resources, so let's make sure that the development we are getting is sustainable and something that we can move forward as the largest city in the country. Again, thinking through transportation options, we've heard a lot from our community that they want more ways to get around, especially with areas within their neighborhoods that are walkable and safe for them. So can we create a code that enables that type of development, as well as a healthy community and environment. So again, thinking about our limited resources, thinking about our open spaces, and protecting the things we really care about within Boise, our foothills, our river, and kind of some of that edgeland south of the city. And so, as Jessica said, we've moved this through adoption. We actually submitted the application to Planning and Zoning and City Council in February. We went through kind of 9 months of public process in which we got thousands of comments from our community. We had a public hearing over multiple days for Planning and Zoning Commission, then went back to City Council in June and had 4 days of public hearing with a final unanimous vote from our City Council. Since June until December 1st, which I think Jessica said is 44 days away, we've been diligently working on making sure that when we make that switch to the new code, when it goes into effect, that all of our systems are ready and that we as staff can handle this new code that we're going to be working on. Then also educating our community members that they have a new code to work with and that there's ways that we'll be able to support them throughout that. So now kind of moving into the framework of our code, and I think will hopefully be helpful to building owners, developers, and folks in your world about how we've organized the different types of zones, and specifically allowing more intent or more variety of development across our city. So we heard a lot from our community, you can't just allow tall buildings everywhere or houses everywhere. We need to be purposeful and intentional about where we're increasing that density. So we created an idea of let's direct development where we have investment. And so we've highlighted this map, and I know it might be a little tricky to see, but these are areas that as a city we've been planning public investment, and that we'd really love to see that private investment support that public investment. So our downtown, and I'll walk through this, State Street, which we've really invested a lot in that public realm, are working towards improving State Street from roadway improvements, transit improvements, streetscapes, things like that. Our best-in-class transit routes, so really tying that desire for more transportation options to where we've already invested in having our best-in-class transit routes. Pathway corridors, knowing that the Greenbelt and Federal Way bike path is kind of key ways to get around our city if you want to get around on bike, so let's make sure those are tied together. And then thinking through activity centers, everyone wants a high park near them, so let's create that and enable that. So as I said, we have our downtown. A big thing with our downtown was City of Boise's downtown is we all have a mental map of what those edges are, but our zoning and our current zoning code didn't actually reflect that. It was much more of a smaller footprint, and much of our downtown currently today is zoned kind of strip mall, suburban, and that's not necessarily what we want for our future downtown. So we went through and made that most of the downtown area MX5. So that's our highest intensity zone, where we want to see tall buildings, kind of what we've already been seeing naturally occur within that core. So just making it easier to do that. So now a developer doesn't have to go through months of public hearing to rezone something to that. Next, as I said, our State Street transit stations. So we created a zone called MX4, and this is where we want to be really deliberate about something called transit-oriented development. So creating new types of buildings there that are going to support a transit trip. This is also hard. I'm going to stop saying this, it's hard to see because it's going to be. But there's only 4 different stops, Whitewater Park, Glenwood Gary, Collister, and Horseshoe Bend Road. So just 4 stops. We've done decades of planning around bus rapid transit on State Street, identified these as primary transit nodes, and really want to see that land use pattern shift over time to be a much more urban environment within those locations. So we've rezoned those. And then, beyond just those pinpoints, we have our active corridor. So we know there's a lot of areas within the city that can accommodate much more growth. So let's identify those and, make it more permissive, make it easier to build a more urban form on these streets. We're not, and this is a good example. This is a new development at Franklin and Orchard. The city is participating in it, but it's an apartment complex at Franklin. And it's just a much different form than what we've seen in other areas of the city. Still providing that housing density, ground floor, activated, whether it's a commercial spot, gym for your apartment, kind of showing that active streetscape so that when people are walking on those streets, which is what we're hoping to see, it's going to be a more comfortable pedestrian environment. And so the areas are State Street, Fairview, Vista, and then some of our activity centers on the West Bench in the southeast. This is a vary in the details, but one of the things that we want to really highlight is folks could say, oh, you're rezoning all these areas for more urban development, but the office or the commercial building on that ground floor, that new apartment, is not going to be very successful because the density is not there. We need a much larger catchment area. So one of the things we've done is actually making it more permissive, or making higher density residential development permitted close to those activity centers and close to those active corridors. So wanting to see Vista in the immediate walking area, and we're saying 2-minute walk from Vista, those areas can have more residential development there to help support the businesses and that active corridor we're trying to see. Let's get people close to the transit that the city of Boise is investing in, and then also close to the commercial retail that ideally our private development community is also investing in. So we know those two go hand in hand. Of course, this is a city and it's a large city where people drive, so we're not in this imaginary world where everything's going to be perfect urban. We have zoning that what we're calling general mixed use, which is MX2, which is kind of our bread and butter development we've seen across the valley. There's going to be this, and we're still zoning for that accordingly. So it's spread out across the city. People will have this, and it will continue to be that. So just to acknowledge that. And then our last one, this one I will say it's hard to see, I know, but this is what we're calling neighborhood scale mixed use, or MX1. This is a lot of the smaller scale properties that maybe we have now a hair salon or occurring into a small office building, really allowing that to over time turn over into something that's authentic to the neighborhood, but can maybe have residential there, a coffee shop, so really that smaller scale. Again, we're not being so strict that it has to be office. It just needs to be at the scale that is, a 1-story, 2-story office building. Maybe it's a coffee shop and an office building. So something that's going to really support that neighborhood. A good example of this is up on Lake Todd and Alpine. Really, that activity center has really organically came up over the last couple of years with the Still, Wild Child, pushing for. So really a community center. It doesn't need to be a huge building, but that is something really special to the people who live nearby. And then, even if that doesn't work, we have we're permitting what we're calling neighborhood cafes. And so this is really within a neighborhood. So all of those other mixed-use zones are kind of on our edges of neighborhoods and drawing people from 1 or 2 neighborhoods over. This is now allowing for neighborhood cafes, which this is a good example of Roosevelt Market, something that's within a neighborhood, very small scale, less than 2,000 square feet, limited hours, limited what they can serve, but it's a place that kind of is special or a little nook within your city. So again, making that permitted in residential zones. And I think that now kind of Jessica is going to kind of say, well, how are we going to get all this to happen? Just because we've made the code, we made it allowed, there's some ways that we're going to strategize how to make this happen.
Thanks, Deanna. So a lot of what I'm going to cover here, it can get very in the weeds and get very technical. The whole idea is that we have a couple of tracks that when you come into our department that you can go through to get approval on your project. If you're doing what we said through the code and the rewrite and everything and all the community conversations, if your project does that, we can approve that at the staff level. When it starts to vary, that's when we need to have another public conversation about it, and that's when you'll go forward to one of our commissions, whether it's design review or planning and zoning or onto city council or historic preservation. So there's definitely this process, this efficiency with maybe sticking within the use. We've said that you can have that type of building in this kind of place, and the form. We said it can be this high and look like this, in a very vague Lego kind of chunky way. So the applicability for this is for pretty large 10,000 square foot areas of contiguous land under common ownership, and it's a primarily new structure that contains residential, commercial, or as a public institution. So if you're one of those, you are what we call, you have use-specific form standards, and you're an allowed use allowed form. There's a little bit more with that too, that if you do this and you do that, if you do this and you do that, you would be what we would, and I'll show a slide, called the type 2, and this just means that it already has been vetted, it already looks exactly close to what we want. We're maybe just getting into the fine-tuning of the design and the setbacks and are there prior restrictions through your deed, but I won't go through all this just because it gets pretty in the weeds. The other path that we have is, so in Idaho, something like inclusionary zoning, which is including affordable housing in your project, is not allowed, nor are requiring things like LEED or that you must meet green building code requirements. But what we can do is create an incentive that you can opt in to do that. And what you get is one, it would speed you up a little bit through that administrative approval process. And also there's extra density, extra units that you could realize if you either meet what we are looking for affordable housing, and that is an amount, the rent that you would pay, set by median household income. HUD sets that rate. We're saying that those units need to be of affordable nature in some way, or sustainability requirements, and those have different expectations too, of moving to all electric or all geothermal, 15% reduction in energy use, 15% reduction in water usage, so there's a lot of irrigation and xeriscape requirements. As well as having places for recycling and other amenities in the building that meet the city's sustainability goals. That then, as you come in and you have your project and we take a look at it, we know then that we have 4 different lanes that we can slot you into. Type 1 reviews are very simple reviews. If you need a new sign, if it's a temporary occupancy permit, something like that, we can almost same day, the next day, get you through with a type 1. Type 2 is an administrative review, so these could be simple projects, these could be more complicated projects, but that's the sweet spot. That's the lane where we've already had this public conversation, we've said exactly in this area, this is what's allowed and this is what it should look like, and you have a project that looks very close to that. Type 3 is when we move on to our appointed review body. So there are some times where you're in a historic district where you'll need to go to historic preservation for review. Larger buildings, some larger industrial buildings, they need to go through design review, so you'll have to do that. Or if you're asking for something that's different than what we said, could be built, and it could be great. It's just that we need to go to planning and zoning and have the commissioners and have that public conversation about, does this intentionally meet the goals and objectives that we have as a city and contributes to the city. And then the state land use code requires that some of those projects need to go on to city council, so that would be like an annexation, a rezone, things that are just legislatively need to go on to city council. So the next slide breaks this down in even more exquisite detail in tiny little letters. But the type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, you can see there how it breaks down. I'll just point out on this one, this is where that allowed use, allowed form is. So if you are of 10,000 square foot, contiguous land, same ownership, new structure, and you build it to our use specific standards, you could be an allowed use, allowed form project, type 2 administrative review. But you also could vary from that, and be this allowed use alternative form, but it needs to go on to planning and zoning. Other things, just we have a hearing examiner that would speed up variances. So if you, let's say you're putting in an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU in your backyard, and it has a certain space in which it needs to be set back from the property line, but you can't accommodate that, or there's a slope there and a retaining wall, and you need a variance, so you need to ask for something that's different than what the code says. Instead of going to that big public hearing process of planning and zoning and on to city council, we fast track you to a hearing examiner, which is, I like to think of them as like Judge Judy, with the haircut and everything, and just really looking at like, does somehow the conditions of the site warrant this exception to be made? And yeah, removing that retaining wall, these are things that we can vary by a foot or so. No, that's great. No, we're on to this. So this is Chutes and Ladders planning version, or Candyland, depending on the age of your children if you play games. So starting up at the top, this first row is everything of you come into the planning department and you need to talk to somebody about your project. Very complicated projects, tiny little projects, doesn't matter, you all start there. What we call early assistance, where we're gonna ask you for your address, we're gonna ask you for what the project is, and we're gonna figure out what zone you're in, and then we're gonna get an idea of, okay, this is what it looks like as far as your review. You move on to concept review. Concept review is a conversation with us about what is the concept for your project. Not what is it literally, but what's the idea? What's the intent of what you're trying to achieve here? If you have a multifamily project that's just surrounded by a sea of parking, and you're like, I want something for young, hip urbanites that go to BSU, that's probably not it. That clientele, they want something a little bit different. So we'll say, okay, all of that is good, but let's move the parking back a little bit, because those young folks right next to BSU, they're gonna wanna walk right to, they're gonna have bikes, they're gonna be walking, they might not have cars. So let's think about what are you trying to achieve here, and then how does your design reinforce that. And this is at a very early stage of your project too, so we're not talking about like engineers and architects and urban designers like really diving into it. It's just let's just think about what it is you're trying to do. At that point, if you're a pretty easy project or it's lining up with exactly what we said we'd want to see, here's your little off-ramp, going up, get approved, type 1, type 2A. If you need to go on because you're either a very complicated project or you're one of those projects that need to go to a public hearing, you'll go down to the next line. And so some projects go on to hearing, all projects that go on to a public hearing need to have a neighborhood meeting with the community around the project. The developer hosts that, asks and answers questions by the community, documents that, goes through that step. They then move on to something that we've created called interdepartmental review. So today, and in the past, what this looked like is somebody submits an application and then they maybe go talk to ACHD. Or they, in ACHD or highway department, road department, or they've already been talking to ACHD, they submit their application, and we're past the point where we can really work out some of those things like where's trash pickup going to happen? Can you access off this road or not? Fire, sewer, all of those things that are kind of a part of the conversation of the project. We have today, because of our process, addressed that much later in the programming of that project, and once we're already kind of with a real application, then it's a little bit harder to change. So interdepartmental review is that conversation. Literally, those agencies around the table about your project for a half hour or an hour to give you all of the insight and input that you need to know before really fine-tuning exactly what that project is. We've heard great feedback on this from other agencies, commissioners, council, developers too, of like, oh, thank you, like let's talk about this ahead of time because it's coming in too late today. If you don't need to go on a hearing because you're one of those allowed use, allowed forms type 2, there's your off-ramp. And if you need to go on to hearing, then you'll just go to the one that is most applicable to you. So whether it's the hearing examiner for a variance, design review commission, historic preservation, planning and zoning, city council. So this is meant to just create a really predictable path for what folks should expect on their review. If it's simple and easy, it'll be pretty quick. If it needs to go to hearing, there's just a couple other steps there, but they're really meant to be a value add in a way to get projects in the community as a part of a discussion sooner. Have that interdepartmental review sooner as well so that agencies can have a look at it before it's close to being done. And then upon finally submitting the project, the review should move much more seamlessly because we've already had eyes on this project for a while. Next slide. Some other updates. So we approved the code, or the city council adopted the code unanimously in June. That didn't mean that we went into effect right away. You can set as a government a future effective date, and that gave us time to get ready. Deanna mentioned this about our business processes, our systems, our applications, and a whole new website, everything for how you can find information about what do I need to know, where do I need to go. And all of that goes live December 1. As well as, so the next slide, our development trackers. So this is something that we had a little test version as we were going through all of our public outreach about how can anyone go to the city website and find out what's happening. We have the ability to express on this map anything that people are coming through and starting to work on our project. So you're curious what's going on that corner, and you've heard some rumblings about a new ITD campus. Like what is going on? You can go to this website. You can also sign up for automatic emails that will let you know what's going on in your neighborhood or the city at large, and just really richly and visually display where we're seeing activity happen. On top of this, we'll also have a dashboard that shows us are we being successful in achieving the goals that we've laid out in the plan as new development comes online. When it comes online is not exactly on December 2nd. So December 1st, the new code goes into effect, but it's going to take us a little time to get through projects that we already know that we have right now under the old code. It's not an insurmountable number of projects. We've got about 20 projects today and probably anticipate another 10 to 15 coming in through the end of November, but they still need to run their course. And then when you submit December 1st, depending on the type of project, you would either be a fast-tracked administratively approved, project, or if you need to go to hearing, we're anticipating that will be about March, that we'll start to see new projects come in at planning and zoning and city council and design reviews. So it will take some time to see if the code is intentionally doing what we've set it out to do. But the expectation is that we don't go another 60 years and not touch this code. In fact, City Council set the expectation that at least annually we come back with recommendations and report out on how is the code doing. And we want to do that. We want to tinker with it. We want to fine tune it. We want it to be this living working code for us so that we don't get far out on this and realize, oh my, if only we had in 2023 thought of this thing. Is the next one? And that's it. So zoning, it's land use, it's planning, but it really affects all of you in your daily life, where you work, where you live, and kind of the conversation that we're having as a city about who we want to be. So thank you all for just letting us dive a little bit under the hood and tell you what's going on, and then we can take questions.
I got a quick one for you. You mentioned the ITD campus in terms of big change of what's going on there. Can you update maybe on that a little bit, as well as what's going on at CWI?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so ITD campus, so the state put up the campus for sale, a bunch of proposals that's supposed to go back. Pacific Companies, Hawkins, were the successful bidders on that. And we have not seen their plans yet. What we know needs to happen, and this was communicated with the TOK and those folks is, in ITD. So that current property right now is zoned something we call A1. It's a big space with not a lot of options to do anything on it. So you have to come forward to us and go through a rezoning process. When it is rezoned, it is one of the TOD corridors. So State Street's a very important street for us. CCDC, Capital City Development Corporation, our development arm, sister agency with the city, has an urban renewal district there. We're going to want to see something really, really great. And that's, I think, a known fact with all the interested parties. So it'll be a public process that project will have to go to planning and zoning, and will have to go on to city council. We're really going to want to see up on State Street that MX4, MX3, like an urban transit, pedestrian friendly with a multi-use path development, as well as on Whitewater, that we know that connection to the Greenbelt is really important to us. And so how does that project kind of transition from State Street to the Greenbelt with a variety of uses, mix of uses within that. So we haven't seen their application yet. CWI, they are, BVA is waiting till the new code goes into effect, because there's just a lot of things in that they like, find attractive, rather than going through a rezone process themselves. And we have already been in conversations with them about their project, and have our design review staff meeting with them next week too, because it's a pretty big investment that's going to happen to that key intersection that's had a lot of investment already go into it. And so I think that will completely transform what happens on 27th and Main, that area there.
Great.
I saw a hand wave back there, yeah.
So my question is, in talking to the architects and developers around town, a lot of them are excited about this rezone, but they're purposely waiting for this rezone to be implemented. So the city's going to get hit planning-wise, and projects that are maybe taking, 12 weeks to get through with the CHDs involved as well. And it may take longer. So what is the city planning just to get over that initial hump like?
Yeah, we've got really good eyes. I mean, there's a lot we don't know. But we've got a really great plan for expectation setting around what happens after December 1st. So we know we have this holdover of a number of projects that we're working through now. We're trying to get through those as fast as we can to clear the deck. We have 3 teams of staff that review projects. There's our development services group that's kind of the first in line. They get the first cut at it. They're going to take the easiest projects. Then as they get more complicated and bigger, it's going to move on to Crystal's group, who was just here earlier, planning and zoning. and our other manager, Josh Wilson, he's the design review historic preservation manager. So their teams are, and we have a number of trainings and a lot of coordination going in on this. Because December has a thing called the holidays,
Right.
we know that we can't realistically hold our first interdepartmental review until after the new year. We're just not gonna be able to get people around Christmas. So our first IDR is probably January 6th. And then, like I said, the first time that you can probably submit your project, which then gives you to a hearing if you need to go to hearing, would set you up for a March 6th planning and zoning, and then a December 8th design review. If you don't hit those dates, it's gonna start to create a queue that we're gonna have an operations dashboard and can see where we're at, and if we're starting to get bogged down in any one type of project or any specific area. I think data and visibility on this is gonna be the most helpful, just so people can kind of see what's happening. And if we have a staffing capacity, like we'll be able to identify that. One of our challenges always still will be having folks get through ACHD with what they need there. They've got a pretty significant backlog, but we'll be able to see when is the project with us and it's our staff who have something to do, and when is the project kind of out for review with other agencies. And I think that opens up a conversation too with whether it's Public Works or Police, Fire, or Idaho Power, or ITD, or ACHD. Like we can see the lifespan of this project and know when it's with us and when it's not. Also, a lot of times projects go back for review or comments or edits with the applicant, and they need some time too. So the full amount of time, sometimes it takes a long time, but like we're really honing in on like when it's our piece of the puzzle, how we get it through as fast as possible. But we're human, so yeah, that's a good question.
I have a question about as far as like the plannings of, when you have an open piece of land, it's easy to develop because there's nobody living there. But how do you guys address, how the city grows out, into other areas where there's an established neighborhoods and there's mature housing there, and there's, do you guys take into fact the demographics and the income of the people that are living there? I think of places like, say, Garden City, for example. You're talking about State Street coming through there. There's a lot of mature neighborhoods that are right off of the city, and these people have been living there for a long time. They may be, elderly, or they may be not as, but now you're going to start putting a lot of influx of maybe younger families, younger people. I mean, how do you guys take that into consideration and think about, some of the areas there too, like trailer homes and things like that, and now you got the boardwalk coming up, and you have these big areas just kind of like plopping down right next to some old lady's house, you know what I mean? And how do you guys figure this all out to make sure that everybody, because you're going to push people out, it's going to get to a point where people start to go like, oh, I don't want to live here anymore. It should just be a nice quiet neighborhood.
Appropriate. It's wine. It's a great. That's what we worry a lot as planners. We're kind of futurists. We are always thinking about the future city, and so one, we know right off the bat that the city's growing. That's a good thing. You don't want to be a city that's not growing. I'm from Syracuse, New York. Like, it's not growing. It's going the other way. So this is a growing city. We're going to have more people. We want people to be in the city of Boise, because when people live closer to where they work and where their kids go to school and where they can shop, that cuts down on transportation costs. Right now we have a problem that there are not a lot of affordable places to buy there. So a lot of people move to a place where they can get a kind of house that they want, or a condo, or whatever it is. But then those transportation costs might increase. So we have to come up with creative ways to create more options for people, and that's what this code intentionally tries to do. Being very thoughtful about mix of uses, greater density, but where is appropriate. And then creative and thoughtful ways about sprinkling that into some of our traditional single-family housing. So it's not going to be a nice little lady's house and a huge mammoth apartment complex right next to her. There's all sorts of rules that we have for setbacks and transition standards, especially off of State Street too, in Vista, Fairview. How do you transition from something that's a little more urban to then quickly residential? So lots of requirements there for, I keep doing this because it's not gonna like buildings are gonna be right next to each other. They will be pushed back a little bit more with a bit of a angled slope so that you don't have the 70-foot building right next to you. You might have it right next to you, but it angles back, and so it creates that light and that space. Also, if things start popping up that do not contribute to the neighborhood, there's going to be a community conversation about that, because like we've said where we anticipate that to happen, and if someone comes through with something that's wildly, dramatically different, it's going to have to go to a public meeting and be a public hearing. So there's still that opportunity and that touch point with the community, as well as notifications and development trackers. So none of these things are just going to happen overnight. There's a lot Deanna could probably speak really well to this too, of what requirements we put in for displacing people who are low income or in need of housing, but requirements around that too, because we had a couple of projects come through the city where unfortunately we didn't have those tools in place. Trying to think of other things packed in. Like I said, it's a 611-page document, but I mean, we are very aware that we, through this code, tend to be the people who you might like to say are like they're trying to change everything. We've made this very predictable and thoughtful and directly with feedback from the community. We had over 70 public meetings, thousands of comments. We changed the code a number of times to be responsive to those comments. So it's all in recognition though that we can't continue the path of just growing into the desert, because that will just exacerbate the problem of, well, then nobody's really actually close to where they need to get to, and we're just driving everywhere. So how do we infill within the city of itself? And, you know, this is really in partnership with other jurisdictions in the Treasure Valley, because like Boise, the capital city, the biggest city, we have this obligation to be thoughtfully trying to grow within our footprint. And we didn't have a lot of tools available to us for how do we do that. So this code intends to do a lot of that. And one of the things that would show are we being effective or not is, does Boise begin to assume a greater share of the region's population than it traditionally has? The city over time it's not really grown in population, but the region has. And a lot of the traffic and a lot of the other things that come with that, can we get more people into the city? But we need to make more affordable options for them to do that. Big, great, awesome question.
I'll ask another question just because. So when bigger projects are coming to town, typically we talk to the city and then we get a project manager that helps us navigate that process. Is that staying in place? Do we still get our PM?
It depends. So you must have very big, large projects.
I'm with ESI Construction, so we do a bit around town.
Yeah. So the biggest, we have 3 project managers on staff in the building department. That is almost like your shepherd through the process. We still have that, and then we also have Joe Bruce, who you are probably most familiar working with, or if not, he's one of our managers. He is specifically focused on affordable housing projects, so little to big. That is another way that we're really trying to unlock the potential for more affordable housing. Is there's only so much you can do to give tax breaks. There's only so much you can do to partner with nonprofits. There's only so much money that can be granted. But what we can do is speed up the process, which might make all the difference as well. No one thing will do that, but for affordable housing, we're really taking it seriously and have a lot of effort around making sure that those incentives are things that are attractive to people and want an easy, predictable, fast process is a part of that. So yeah, our project managers did not go away.
Good.
They're fantastic.
Anything else?
Okay, well, thank you all.
I think in closing, for me, it's good to hear and meet the people behind the decisions and people that create and ultimately enforce the policies. If you travel, even a little bit, you get to experience different cities and places. and they're not all like Boise. I think the more I travel, the more I realize how special a place it is, and I appreciate your earnest efforts to preserve and kind of create that future city, right? That our kids and our grandkids hopefully will be here to benefit from, and obviously affordable housing is a big concern for anybody that has parents or children that want to move back and be near us. It's not easy, but without the framework and without the policies and without the vision, it has no chance of happening. So we have to start somewhere, and I applaud you and applaud everybody that is involved in it. So, Dave, anything?